So this HOA president thought she could steal my family's 80-year-old ranch and turn it into luxury condos. Biggest mistake of her miserable life. There I was, watching through my security cameras as Cordelia Blackthorne literally threw herself against my new biometric gate, screaming threats at 2 in the morning. She'd been pounding on that steel barrier for 3 hours straight, her perfectly applied makeup now streaked down her cheeks. For 3 weeks, she'd called every government agency from here to Washington, D.C., demanding they force me to tear down my gate on my property. The woman had already blown $47,000 of stolen HOA money trying to destroy me. By the end of this story, she'd be serving 3 years in federal prison, lose her house, and become the laughingstock of our entire county. But first, what would you do if someone tried to steal your family land? Drop it in the comments. And tell me where you're watching from. These HOA nightmares are spreading everywhere. Let me back up and introduce myself. I'm Dex Morrison, 45 years old, recently divorced software engineer who'd been suffocating in Portland concrete for way too long. You know that soul-crushing feeling when you realize you're paying $3,000 a month to stare at your neighbor's brick wall? Yeah, that was my life. Then my eccentric Uncle Rusty passed away and left me $400,000. Uncle Rusty was family legend for his creative solutions to bureaucratic problems. The man once built a trebuchet to launch his neighbor's illegally parked car back onto their property. Totally legal, looked it up in city ordinances myself. With 2 teenage kids needing better than weekend visits to my shoebox apartment, I started hunting for rural property. Found this incredible 47-acre ranch in Millfield County, Oregon. Creek running through old-growth timber, barn begging for restoration, and the price? $380 for land worth twice that. Red flag? Absolutely. Did I care? Not even a little. The seller, Bill Hutchins, was this sweet elderly rancher desperate to reach his grandkids in Arizona. Had tears streaming down his weathered cheeks when he handed over the keys. "She's been good to 3 generations of my family," he whispered, voice cracking. "You treat her right." Moving day hit me with that crisp October air that smells like freedom and wood smoke. I could feel the rough bark of century-old pines under my palms, hear gravel crunching under the moving truck's tires like nature's welcome mat. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely hopeful. That's when the devil in designer khakis appeared. Cordelia Blackthorne, 52, self-proclaimed Community Standards Coordinator of adjacent Willowbrook Estates. Picture your worst middle school principal crossed with a tax auditor, driving a white Lexus SUV with custom plates reading Rules 1. Yes, she paid extra to advertise her personality disorder. Willowbrook Estates, 200 cookie-cutter houses with HOA rules governing everything from acceptable doormat colors to maximum dog walking duration. These people measured grass height with actual rulers and maintained spreadsheets tracking neighbor compliance violations. My ranch predated their suburban paradise by 80 years, but we shared Meadowlark Lane access road. Old Bill had been neighborly, letting HOA residents jog his property boundaries and walk their precious designer dogs. Cordelia clicked across my driveway in spotless tennis shoes, clutching her clipboard like a religious artifact. Her voice dripped fake sweetness that made your fillings ache, artificial sweetener mixed with concentrated smugness. "Excuse me," she announced, excusing absolutely nothing. "You'll need HOA approval for that moving truck." I set down boxes containing my kids' new bunk beds, pine shavings still clinging to the cardboard. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but my property isn't part of your HOA. Her practiced smile twitched. "Meadowlark Lane falls under shared community standards. That truck violates our non-resident vehicle restrictions." She thrust a 47-page rulebook at me, certain sections pre-highlighted like a legal brief. "I own this property outright," I replied calmly. "The access road predates your development by decades." That's when her mask cracked completely. Her voice pitched higher, sharper. "We'll just see about that." She whipped out her phone, photographing my license plates while pulling an actual tape measure from her purse to document my truck's dimensions. She called city code enforcement while standing in my driveway, speaking loud enough to ensure I heard every poisonous word. "Yes, I need to report a non-compliant commercial vehicle in violation of community standards." But here's what really chilled me. As 3 other residents jogged past during her performance, I caught their expressions. Fear. These people were genuinely terrified of this woman. One elderly gentleman actually crossed the street to avoid making eye contact. As Cordelia climbed back into her Lexus, she delivered her parting shot through the rolled-down window. "This neighborhood has standards, Mr. Morrison. You'd better learn them fast." Watching her drive away, I thought about Uncle Rusty's trebuchet and wondered what other creative solutions this situation might require. Cordelia didn't waste time declaring war. By week 2, I had a city inspector knocking on my door at 7 in the morning, claiming anonymous noise complaints. And this was particularly impressive, considering I hadn't started any renovation work yet, and the loudest sound on my property was the creek babbling over smooth river stones. The inspector, a tired-looking guy named Pete, apologized while walking my property. "Look, I gotta respond to complaints, but this is pretty obviously bogus. Someone described specific power tool sounds and construction debris that, well, clearly don't exist." He gestured at my pristine, untouched barn. Same day, and I mean within hours, 3 different utility companies showed up for service verification: electric, water, and gas, all claiming they'd received reports of irregular usage patterns. The gas guy actually laughed when I pointed out I didn't even have gas service connected yet. That's when Jimmy, my postal carrier, filled me in on the bigger picture while leaning against his mail truck. The afternoon sun was beating down on the metal, and I could feel the heat radiating off it like a furnace. "Man, she's been doing this to folks for years. Remember the Kowalski family? Single mom with 3 kids? Cordelia filed so many complaints about inappropriate children's toys in their yard, the poor woman moved away just to get some peace." I started digging deeper, and the pattern emerged like a virus under a microscope. Cordelia had systematically targeted anyone who didn't fit her suburban cookie-cutter vision. The elderly veteran with the PTSD service dog had aggressive animal complaints filed weekly. The Hispanic contractor got inappropriate work vehicle citations for parking his 20-year-old pickup on his own driveway. The Asian family whose foreign cooking odors somehow violated community aesthetic standards. Her method was brilliant in its cruelty: death by 1,000 bureaucratic paper cuts. No single complaint was worth fighting, but the cumulative harassment drove people away like psychological warfare. Time for some detective work. I spent an afternoon at the county courthouse, breathing in that distinctive smell of old paper and industrial carpet cleaner while diving into dusty property records. My fingers were getting black from handling decades-old documents when I found the gold mine. My ranch held easement rights dating back to 1943. Not only was Meadowlark Lane not under HOA control, technically, the HOA had been using my family's road for the past 5 years without permission. Uncle Rusty's grandfather had built that road with his own hands and a borrowed steamroller, and here I'd been apologizing for using my own damn driveway. Back when I was getting my engineering degree, one of my professors hammered into us that organizations only have the authority you give them. HOAs can't regulate property outside their jurisdiction, no matter how official their letterhead looks. The trick is knowing your actual legal rights before someone in a power suit tries to intimidate you. But Cordelia wasn't done escalating. She appeared at my door the following Tuesday with what she called a cease and desist letter from the HOA's attorney. The legal document, and I use that term loosely, demanded I stop disturbing community character through non-conforming existence. I'm not making this up. They literally wanted me to conform to their standards by existing differently. The letter listed demands that would have been hilarious if they weren't dead serious. Paint my 80-year-old barn to match their approved beige color palette, remove my unsightly split-rail fence that had been there since the Truman administration, and somehow make my property architecturally consistent with houses built 7 decades later. Here's where I made my first strategic move. I called Maxine Torres, a local attorney who specialized in property rights. Maxine took one look at the HOA's demands and burst into laughter that echoed through her office like a gunshot. "Mr. Morrison," she said, wiping tears from her eyes, "this letter is worth less than the paper it's printed on, but it does give us grounds for a harassment complaint." My counter strategy was simple: document everything and file formal complaints. But then Cordelia delivered her masterstroke, and this is where things got really interesting. She showed up during my morning coffee on the porch, her heels clicking aggressively against the wooden steps like an angry woodpecker. The overwhelming cloud of her perfume mixed with mountain pine air created this nauseating cocktail that made my eyes water. "You think you're so smart," she hissed, her voice pitched higher than a smoke detector. "You think you can just waltz into our community and ignore our standards?" I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the warm ceramic mug against my palms. That's when she dropped her bombshell. I know exactly who you are, Dex Morrison. Divorced, unemployed, living off inheritance money. What kind of example does that set for our children? She'd been investigating me. Personal details only available through background checks or social media stalking. This woman had crossed from petty harassment into something much darker. "Ma'am," I said calmly, setting my coffee cup down with a decisive clink, "you just made your biggest mistake yet." The real game was just beginning. Cordelia's psychological warfare kicked into high gear by week 4. Every morning at exactly 6 a.m., she'd park her white Lexus sideways across Meadowlark Lane, claiming she was exercising her rights as community representative. The smell of her overheated brakes mixed with morning dew as she'd screech to a stop, forcing me to hike a quarter-mile through wet grass just to reach my own truck. She'd leave these passive-aggressive sticky notes on my windshield written in her perfect Catholic school cursive. Consideration for others begins with self-awareness, and community harmony requires individual sacrifice. The paper felt cheap and vindictive under my fingers, but I started collecting them like evidence. That's when I met Javier Gonzalez at Martinez Hardware, both of us reaching for security camera batteries. This guy had survived Cordelia's wrath and lived to tell the tale. "You're the new guy she's been terrorizing," he said, grinning like we were old war buddies. "Welcome to the resistance, hermano." Over coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since the Clinton administration, Javier shared his horror story. Cordelia had tried fining him $500 for inappropriate work vehicle aesthetics. His crime was driving a 20-year-old pickup with honest work dents. "But here's what'll blow your mind," Javier whispered, glancing around the empty diner. "My cousin works for the landscaping company that's supposed to maintain their common areas. They haven't been paid in 4 months, but the HOA budget shows regular payments to them." The coffee suddenly tasted even more bitter as the implication sank in. She wasn't just a control freak. She was stealing from her own neighbors. Time to get serious about documentation. Back in my engineering days, we lived by one rule. If it's not logged with timestamps and backups, it never happened. I installed a Ring security system that would make the Pentagon jealous. Motion sensors, night vision, smartphone alerts that buzzed every time someone breathed near my property line. Within days, I had Cordelia's entire stalking routine captured in 4K resolution. Her daily property inspections with a measuring tape, photographing my barn from 16 different angles, even timing my morning routine with a stopwatch like some deranged efficiency expert. But then she pulled her masterstroke, and this is where things got genuinely creepy. Cordelia organized what she called a community safety patrol, basically recruiting 3 other HOA board members to take shifts watching my property in 8-hour rotations. All day, every day, there was at least one car positioned with binoculars trained on my barn. They claimed I was suspicious for working after dark in my own workshop. The absurdity hit me while I was organizing Uncle Rusty's old tools by lamplight. These people were surveilling me for the crime of being productive after sunset. That's when I started digging into public records and discovered the truly horrifying pattern. Cordelia had been systematically driving away anyone undesirable for 5 years running. Old Bill Hutchins hadn't just been motivated to sell. He'd been psychologically tortured into leaving after enduring 2 years of daily harassment. Before him, a young Latina single mother who lasted 18 months before moving back in with her parents. A black veteran who'd only managed 8 months before his PTSD couldn't handle the constant scrutiny. Always the same targets: elderly, minorities, single parents, veterans, anyone who didn't fit her narrow suburban fantasy. Cordelia was ethnically cleansing the neighborhood one harassment campaign at a time, but I had something her previous victims didn't: the technical skills to fight back and the Morrison family's legendary stubborn streak. I launched my counteroffensive. Every morning at 5 a.m. sharp, I'd jog past every house in Willowbrook Estates. Perfectly legal use of public sidewalks, and my route just happened to circle Cordelia's house 3 times. My running shoes on pavement created this rhythmic drumbeat that echoed off her walls like a war drum. The beauty of country acoustics? Every footstep carried. I could hear her scrambling to her bedroom window each morning, probably wondering when I'd slip up and give her something real to complain about. After documenting 2 weeks of her surveillance obsession, I filed a formal harassment complaint with the county sheriff. Deputy Martinez, this no-nonsense guy who looked like he'd seen everything twice, took one look at my evidence folder and let out a low whistle. 3 inches of documentation, he said, flipping through photos and printed emails. Most people don't know harassment laws apply to HOA officials just like anyone else. He paid Cordelia a visit that same afternoon, and I watched through my security cameras as her face went white when he explained that continued unwanted contact constituted criminal harassment under state law. But Cordelia wasn't done. That evening, she showed up at my door with an envelope that made my blood run cold. "I know about your kids, Dex," she said with a smile that belonged in a horror movie. "Custody arrangements can be so fragile." The envelope Cordelia handed me contained copies of my divorce papers, custody agreement, and what looked like surveillance photos of my kids getting dropped off for their weekend visits. My hands actually trembled as I flipped through images of Tyler and Madison walking up my front steps, completely unaware they were being stalked by this psychopath. "How did you get these?" I kept my voice steady, but inside I was calculating how many ways I could destroy this woman without going to prison. Her smile stretched wider, like a snake unhinging its jaw. Public records are so accessible these days, and concerned citizens have a duty to report unsafe environments for children. The words dripped poison. I wonder what Child Protective Services would think about children visiting a property under active investigation for safety violations. That's when I realized Cordelia had been playing a completely different game. This wasn't about HOA rules. This was systematic psychological terrorism designed to crush anyone who didn't submit to her authority. She'd weaponized bureaucracy itself. But threatening my kids? That was her biggest mistake. I spent that night researching everything about Cordelia Blackthorne, the blue glow of my laptop screen burning my eyes as I dug through digital records until sunrise. Social media posts, property records, business licenses, court filings, building a complete profile of a woman who'd been abusing power for years. What I found made my software engineer brain light up like a Christmas tree. Cordelia had been catastrophically sloppy with her shell company. Meadowlark Development LLC was registered with her personal address, and the incorporation papers contained a fatal flaw. She'd listed herself as both registered agent and principal owner, directly violating Oregon's conflict of interest statutes for HOA board members. Even better, she'd been using the HOA's tax-exempt status to purchase materials for her personal renovations. Those community improvement receipts I'd found? Half were for premium kitchen appliances that perfectly matched her Facebook remodel photos. The aroma of strong coffee mixed with righteous fury as I compiled evidence at my kitchen table. Every receipt, every bank transfer, every social media post documenting her systematic theft from the neighbors she was supposed to serve. But Cordelia wasn't finished escalating. 3 days later, I came home to find my gate entrance vandalized with spray paint so vile I won't repeat it here. The sharp chemical smell of aerosol still hung in the mountain air like toxic cologne, making my eyes water. My 4K security cameras had captured everything. Cordelia herself at 2:47 a.m., dressed in black like some deranged suburban ninja, vandalizing my property with professional-grade equipment. She'd even brought a stepladder to reach the higher sections, her face clearly visible as she worked with manic precision. Deputy Martinez wasn't amused. "Ma'am, that's destruction of property and criminal mischief," he informed her. "One more incident and you're looking at arrest." But watching her reaction through my camera feed, I could see the dangerous gleam in her eyes. This woman was building toward a complete psychological break. That's when my attorney Maxine Torres called with information that changed everything. "Dex, I've been diving deeper into your family's historical property rights," she said, excitement crackling through the phone. "Remember how your great-grandfather built that road? Well, he was smarter than we thought. He also retained exclusive rights to the mountain spring that feeds your creek." I set down my coffee mug with a clink. "Meaning what exactly?" "Meaning every single house in Willowbrook Estates depends on water that flows across your property. You could legally cut off their entire water supply tomorrow if you chose to." The nuclear option. 200 families could be without water with one phone call to the water district. Cordelia's perfect kingdom would become uninhabitable within days. But as I sat on my porch that evening, listening to the creek bubble peacefully over stones worn smooth by decades of mountain runoff, I realized using that power would make me no better than her. Those houses contained innocent families, kids doing homework, elderly folks watching evening news, people whose only crime was buying homes in the wrong development. Then Cordelia made her final, catastrophic mistake. My security system alerts went off at midnight. There she was again. But this time she wasn't alone. Three figures in dark clothing were pouring something into my wellhead, the source of my family's drinking water. The footage was crystal clear, Cordelia directing two men as they dumped industrial herbicide directly into my water supply, environmental terrorism that could have killed my entire family. I didn't call Deputy Martinez this time. I called the FBI's Environmental Crimes Unit, the State Attorney General, and Rosa Martinez from the Portland Tribune. Uncle Rusty always said the best revenge was living well, but sometimes living well meant making sure monsters couldn't hurt anyone else ever again. Cordelia Blackthorne had just committed federal crimes on camera, and I was about to make sure the whole world knew about it. The well-poisoning footage was just the tip of the iceberg. When I enhanced the video using software from my engineering days, the smell of burned coffee filling my home office as I worked through the night, I could make out license plates on the vehicles her accomplices drove. The enhanced pixels revealed a truth that made my stomach drop. One vehicle belonged to Bradley Fleming, our city councilman. The other was registered to someone listed as development consultant for Meadowlark LLC. My hands were literally shaking as I called Rosa Martinez at the Tribune. Within hours, she'd connected dots that painted a picture so ugly it belonged in a crime thriller, not small-town Oregon. Dex, Rosa's voice was tight with excitement and disgust. Bradley Fleming owes Cordelia's husband Drake $50,000 in gambling debts. Those weekly poker games at the country club? They've been planning this for years. The conspiracy unraveled like a rotten onion, each layer more putrid than the last. Meadowlark Development LLC had preliminary approval for a 40-home luxury subdivision worth $8.4 million in projected profits, all contingent on acquiring my ranch. Cordelia held a 25% silent partnership, which explained her desperation. Every harassment campaign, every bogus complaint, every moment of psychological torture had been calculated moves in a massive land grab disguised as community standards enforcement. But the scope was breathtaking. Rosa's investigation revealed that Cordelia had been running this scam for a decade, systematically targeting anyone whose property could be developed profitably. The elderly widow who'd sold her Victorian mansion for half its value after months of noise complaints. The black veteran whose PTSD was triggered by constant harassment until he fled town. The Hispanic family driven away by discriminatory enforcement of rules that didn't exist. Each forced sale had cleared the way for Cordelia's developer network, with profits flowing back through shell companies and forgiven poker debts. I remember learning in business school that most white-collar criminals get caught because they get greedy and leave paper trails. Cordelia had left a highway of evidence. The HOA's missing $127,000 matched her home renovation costs down to the penny. Bank transfers, receipts, even Instagram posts of her new kitchen appliances, all purchased with stolen community funds. The forensic accounting made my head spin. 12 families destroyed over 10 years. 12 properties seized through psychological warfare. 12 pieces of our community transformed into profit centers for a criminal enterprise masquerading as civic responsibility. The most chilling discovery was the water rights angle. Every targeted property shared historical water access that could block future development. Cordelia wasn't just stealing homes. She was stealing generational rights that families had held since before Oregon was even a state. City Councilman Bradley had been earning his debt forgiveness by fast-tracking permits for Cordelia's network while mysteriously losing applications from her targets. The building inspector who'd been harassing me? Bank records showed a $15,000 consulting fee from Meadowlark LLC deposited the same week he'd started his bogus inspections. The entire municipal system had been weaponized to serve one woman's greed. Sitting in my darkened office at 3 a.m., the only sounds the hum of my computer and the distant babble of the creek outside, I realized they'd made one catastrophic error. They'd targeted a software engineer who understood digital forensics and had Uncle Rusty's legendary stubborn streak. I had evidence of mail fraud, wire fraud, environmental crimes, civil rights violations, and criminal conspiracy reaching from suburban boardrooms to city hall to development companies across 3 counties. Uncle Rusty's ranch had become the keystone that could topple an entire criminal empire built on displaced families and stolen dreams. The question wasn't whether I could destroy Cordelia anymore. The question was how spectacular I could make her downfall. The next morning I called an emergency meeting in Uncle Rusty's old barn. The smell of weathered wood and motor oil still hung in the air, mixed with the fresh scent of pine sawdust from my recent cleanup efforts. This felt exactly right, plotting justice in the same space where Uncle Rusty had built his legendary trebuchet to launch his neighbor's illegally parked car. Javier arrived first, followed by Rosa Martinez hauling a laptop bag that looked like it could survive a nuclear blast. Martha Tatum showed up with her food truck parked outside, claiming she needed to feed the resistance properly. Last came Maxine Torres, my attorney, whose briefcase practically hummed with legal energy. "All right, people," I said, spreading documents across Uncle Rusty's workbench while Martha distributed Korean BBQ tacos. "We're not just taking down one psychotic HOA president. We're dismantling a decade-long criminal enterprise." Rosa somehow produced a whiteboard from her Honda Civic, I'm still not sure how physics allowed that, and started mapping connections like she was planning D-Day. "I've been coordinating with federal agencies. The FBI's Environmental Crimes Unit wants the well poisoning charges. The state attorney general is practically drooling over the municipal corruption. And the IRS is very interested in those unreported development profits." The plan crystallized like perfectly debugged code. Phase 1. Continue gathering bulletproof evidence while letting Cordelia think she was winning. Phase 2. Coordinate simultaneous investigations by multiple agencies. Phase 3. Public exposure at the next HOA board meeting with maximum media coverage. Phase 4. Launch community improvement initiatives from the ashes of her empire. Javier had been building our intelligence network with the efficiency of a master craftsman. "My cousin Maria works in city planning," he said between bites of Martha's excellent bulgogi. "She says Bradley Fleming's been rubber stamping permit approvals without environmental impact studies. That's federal jurisdiction." Martha contributed something unexpected while refilling our coffee from a thermos that somehow held enough for 12 people. "My food truck route covers 3 counties. I've met 4 other families who got identical treatment from HOA boards connected to Meadowlark Development. This operation spans half of Oregon." The technical preparation showcased everything I'd learned from 20 years in software engineering. I'd upgraded to surveillance equipment that would make the Pentagon jealous. Motion sensors detecting movement at 50 yards, night vision cameras recording in 4K, audio equipment sensitive enough to capture whispered conversations through car windows. Back in my corporate days, we had a saying, "Documentation is litigation insurance." Turned out that applied perfectly to criminal investigations. Everything was stored on encrypted servers with blockchain verification for court admissibility. Every video file, audio recording, and digital document was legally bulletproof. Maxine outlined our legal strategy while pacing the barn like a caged predator, her heels clicking against concrete with military precision. "We're building RICO charges, Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. This isn't just fraud, it's organized crime." She paused for dramatic effect, probably practicing for the courtroom performance of her career. "RICO doesn't just go after individual crimes, it dismantles the entire criminal organization. We can seize assets, freeze accounts, and ensure this never happens to another family." The coalition building amazed me. Word spread through unofficial channels faster than wildfire. Our weekly barn meetings grew from 5 core conspirators to 37 affected families ready for war. Each session brought fresh evidence and new stories of systematic psychological torture. Parents shared recordings of middle-of-the-night threatening calls. Veterans documented harassment specifically designed to trigger PTSD episodes. Elderly residents brought medical records showing stress-related hospitalizations after months of bogus complaints and constant surveillance. Rosa documented everything with video interviews, building what she called the human cost archive. These weren't property disputes. They were stories of American families destroyed by legalized psychological warfare disguised as community standards. Our communication network ran on encrypted apps that would impress intelligence agencies. Weekly strategy calls using voice-over IP to avoid eavesdropping. Secure document sharing through servers in different states. Military-style code names for operational security. I was Ranch Hand, Rosa became Tribune, Maxine was Legal Eagle. The evidence vault grew exponentially. Bank records showing suspicious transfers between shell companies. Email chains discussing problem properties requiring community intervention. Audio recordings of city officials pre-deciding permit denials before reviewing applications. By week 6, we operated like a professional intelligence cell from an 80-year-old barn. Federal agencies coordinated through Rose's media contacts. State investigators built parallel cases. Local law enforcement finally treated our complaints seriously instead of dismissing them as neighbor disputes. The psychological preparation was almost as crucial as legal strategy. We needed Cordelia to feel victorious right until everything collapsed. Strategic disinformation to test her intelligence sources, allowing her to commit additional crimes while being recorded, building toward maximum public humiliation at the perfect moment. Everything was ready for the coordinated strike that would restore justice and transform our community forever. Cordelia's desperation reached new heights when she realized I wasn't backing down. By week 7, she'd escalated from petty harassment to outright sabotage. I woke to the sound of chainsaws at 5 a.m. and found a century-old oak tree fallen across my driveway, completely blocking access to my ranch. Professional tree service crews and unmarked trucks were loading equipment as I stumbled outside in my pajamas. Emergency storm damage removal, they claimed, though we hadn't seen rain in 3 weeks. The smell of fresh sawdust and motor oil hung heavy in the morning air as I surveyed the destruction. This wasn't wind damage. The cut marks were clean, precise, positioned for maximum inconvenience. My primary security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned during that exact hour, but the backup system I'd secretly installed caught everything in 4K glory. Deputy Martinez whistled low when he saw the footage. That's criminal mischief and destruction of property. Problem is, they paid cash and disappeared without leaving contact information. But Cordelia's next move hit where it hurt most. She weaponized Child Protective Services against my kids. The call came 3 days later. A concerned citizen had filed detailed complaints alleging I was exposing Tyler and Madison to unsafe living conditions and environmental hazards. The caseworker, Janet, sounded exhausted as she explained she had to investigate every report, no matter how obviously vindictive. Someone provided photographs of your property claiming there are exposed electrical wires, contaminated water, and evidence of drug manufacturing, Janet said, her voice heavy with skepticism. The photographs showed Uncle Rusty's vintage electronics projects labeled as suspicious laboratory equipment. My water testing kit, bought specifically because Cordelia had poisoned my well, was described as chemical manufacturing supplies. Even my kids' weekend camping gear became evidence of unsafe living conditions. My hands clenched into fists as I realized how extensive her surveillance operation had become. For months, Cordelia had been cataloging every innocent aspect of normal ranch life, twisting tools and projects into weapons for psychological warfare. The insurance fraud attempt was almost comically obvious. Cordelia filed a claim against my homeowner's policy with staged photos claiming my aggressive dog had attacked her. The fact that I don't own a dog apparently didn't deter her creativity. She'd produced fake medical bills from Dr. Patterson, whose address traced to a vacant Portland lot. My investigator, Carol, who'd clearly seen every scam imaginable, started laughing the moment she saw the claim. Mr. Morrison, she's got golden retriever bite marks, but claims you own a German Shepherd. In 30 years, I've never seen fraud this sloppy. The daily harassment campaign became relentless. Noise complaints filed around the clock. 6 a.m. for my coffee grinder, 2 p.m. for truck engine noise, 10 p.m. for television volume. City code enforcement started calling me directly before sending inspectors. They were so tired of her fabricated reports. Anonymous DEA tips about suspicious chemical odors brought Special Agent Rodriguez to my door in full tactical gear. The poor guy looked like he'd rather be anywhere else as I walked him through my barn, pointing out vintage electronics and computer equipment. Sir, whoever's filing these reports has detailed property layouts and scheduling information, he said, shaking his head. This suggests either law enforcement background or serious mental instability. Weekly fire marshal visits for safety inspections became routine. Each found nothing but served Cordelia's harassment objectives perfectly. Then came her desperation move, the bribery attempt that would seal her fate. She cornered me at my mailbox carrying an envelope thick enough to choke a horse. The afternoon sun beat down on the gravel as she approached, her designer heels clicking like a countdown timer. $600,000 cash, she said without preamble, her voice shaking with barely controlled desperation. Take it and disappear before I destroy everything you care about. I opened the envelope to find stacks of 20s and 50s that smelled like basement mold, obviously laundered money. The bills felt grimy between my fingers, tainted with desperation and criminality. "And if I don't take it?" I asked, knowing my security system was recording every word in crystal clear audio. Her composure cracked completely, revealing the monster underneath. "Then I'll make sure your children never feel safe anywhere again. I know their school schedules, their friends' addresses, everywhere they go. Take the money or I'll destroy them too." The threat against Tyler and Madison crossed every line that mattered. This wasn't about property anymore. This was a dangerous woman threatening to harm innocent children to protect her criminal empire. But she'd just handed me the evidence I needed to end this war permanently. "Mrs. Blackthorne," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. "You just made the worst mistake of your life." Her threats against my kids would be her downfall, captured forever on digital video for federal prosecutors to present to a jury. After Cordelia threatened my children, the gloves came completely off. Within 48 hours, she'd escalated to what I can only describe as domestic terrorism. I woke up to find my barn windows shot out with paintball guns, bright orange paint splattered across century-old wood like some demented art project. The acrid smell of paint thinner mixed with mountain air as I surveyed the damage. My security cameras had captured everything. Cordelia herself, at 3 a.m., wearing camouflage and wielding what looked like military-grade paintball equipment. She'd brought a ladder to reach the high windows, working with methodical precision like she was marking enemy territory. But the vandalism was just foreplay. 2 days later, I found my mailbox destroyed with what appeared to be a baseball bat, the metal post twisted and bent like a pretzel. Federal crime, since it involved postal services, but Cordelia was beyond caring about legal consequences. The smell of gasoline lingered around the wreckage. She'd tried to set fire to the mail inside, but apparently couldn't get her lighter to work in the morning dew. My security footage showed her fumbling with matches for 10 minutes, cursing like a sailor who'd just discovered his ship was sinking. That's when Deputy Martinez called with news that changed everything. "Dex, we arrested Cordelia's husband Drake last night. Domestic violence call from their neighbor. Turns out he's been trying to divorce her for months, claims she's become completely unhinged over this property dispute." Drake had been secretly recording conversations with Cordelia for weeks, building evidence for his divorce attorney. The recordings revealed the true scope of her obsession. She'd been planning to have me removed through increasingly desperate measures. "She's been talking about hiring people to make you disappear," Drake told investigators. "I thought she meant scare you away, but lately, I'm not so sure." The revelation sent chills down my spine. This woman wasn't just harassing me. She was contemplating violence against my family. But Cordelia's nuclear option was still coming. 3 days later, I got a call from Mayor Patricia Hendricks. "Dex, I need you to know that Cordelia Blackthorne has filed for emergency eminent domain proceedings against your property. She's claiming your ranch is needed for critical public infrastructure." The emergency city council meeting was called for that Friday, with only 48 hours notice to prevent public attendance. Cordelia had convinced 3 council members that my property posed an imminent public safety threat, requiring immediate seizure. The manufactured emergency was based on completely fabricated reports. My well was allegedly contaminating the municipal water supply, my barn was supposedly storing hazardous materials, and my access road was creating traffic safety hazards for school buses. Each claim was easily disprovable, but the eminent domain process could take months to fight, during which the city could seize my property and demolish everything Uncle Rusty had built. I called an emergency session with my coalition. The barn filled with grim faces as I explained Cordelia's Hail Mary play. Rosa had been working her media contacts, and the news wasn't good. "She's got Bradley Fleming and 2 other council members in her pocket," Rosa reported, her laptop screen casting blue light across her worried face. "They're planning to vote Friday night when nobody's watching. Maxine was already drafting emergency injunctions, but legal processes take time we didn't have. We need to make this public before they can ram it through," she said, pacing the barn like a caged panther. That's when Martha suggested something brilliant. "What if we don't just attend the meeting? What if we pack it?" The next 36 hours became a masterclass in grassroots organizing. Rosa reached out to every family Cordelia had targeted over the past decade. Javier mobilized the construction community. Turns out every contractor in 3 counties had horror stories about dealing with Cordelia's permits and inspections. Martha used her food truck network to spread word through every small business owner who'd been harassed by arbitrary enforcement. The message was simple. If they could steal my ranch through eminent domain fraud, no one's property was safe. By Thursday afternoon, our encrypted chat had 127 active members planning to attend Friday's meeting. Local news had picked up the story, and Rose's Tribune article about emergency eminent domain abuse was trending on social media. But Cordelia had one final, desperate move. Thursday night, my motion sensors triggered at 11 p.m. 3 figures in dark clothing were approaching my barn, carrying what looked like gasoline cans. The infrared cameras captured everything as Cordelia directed 2 men in spreading accelerant around my building's foundation. I called 911 immediately, but more importantly, I called Rosa. This was attempted arson, a federal crime that would finally give us the ammunition to destroy Cordelia's entire operation. As sirens wailed in the distance and spotlights illuminated 3 figures fleeing through the forest, I realized tomorrow's city council meeting wouldn't be about eminent domain anymore. It would be Cordelia's public execution. Friday night's city council meeting was supposed to seat maybe 30 people in the Millfield Community Center. Instead, 184 residents packed every chair, lined the walls, and spilled out into the parking lot. Local news crews from 3 stations had set up cameras, while Rosa live-streamed everything on the Tribune's social media channels. The air inside felt electric with tension, thick with the smell of too many people in too small a space and the faint aroma of Martha's food truck operating in the parking lot to feed the crowd. You could practically taste the anticipation. Cordelia walked in at exactly 7 o'clock, flanked by her remaining loyal board members, completely oblivious to the ambush waiting for her. She'd dressed for victory in a crisp navy suit and that same fake smile she'd worn the day we first met. The woman actually waved at the cameras like she was running for office. Mayor Hendricks called the meeting to order, her voice tight with stress. We're here to consider emergency eminent domain proceedings for the Morrison Ranch property, based on public safety concerns filed by HOA President Cordelia Blackthorne. That's when Rosa stood up, her press credentials hanging around her neck like a weapon. Madam Mayor, before we proceed, I think the public should know that Mrs. Blackthorne was arrested this morning for attempted arson. The room erupted. Cordelia's face went white as bleached bone, her perfect composure finally cracking under the weight of 184 pairs of eyes staring at her in disbelief. That's a lie, she shrieked, jumping to her feet. This is a coordinated attack by criminals trying to destroy our community. State investigator William Tatum stepped forward from the back of the room, his badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. Mrs. Blackthorne, you were arrested at 11:47 p.m. yesterday for attempted arson, criminal conspiracy, and environmental terrorism. Your accomplices have already confessed.
Yes, you are authorities.
The audience was dead silent except for the whisper of cameras capturing every moment of Cordelia's meltdown. Furthermore, investigator Tatum continued, our 3-month investigation has uncovered evidence of mail fraud, wire fraud, embezzlement, and civil rights violations spanning 10 years. Federal prosecutors will be filing RICO charges Monday morning. That's when the floodgates opened. Martha Tatum stood up first, her voice carrying across the packed room. This woman tried to ban my food truck because I'm Asian. She filed false health complaints for 2 years. Javier rose next. She stole $47,000 from contractor payments, then blamed us for poor workmanship when we couldn't afford proper materials. One by one, 15 residents shared their stories. The elderly veteran whose PTSD was deliberately triggered by harassment campaigns. The single mother driven from her home by fabricated child welfare complaints. The Hispanic family terrorized until they sold their house for half its value. Each testimony hammered another nail into Cordelia's coffin. The cameras captured every word, every tear, every moment of pain this woman had inflicted on innocent families for her own profit. EPA agent Rodriguez presented the environmental crimes evidence, including the well-poisoning footage that showed Cordelia directing 2 men to dump herbicide into my family's drinking water. This could have killed an entire family, he stated matter-of-factly. Cordelia's last desperate attempt at control was pathetic to witness. This is my neighborhood, she screamed, spit flying from her mouth. I built this community. I protected property values. These people are destroying everything I worked for. The crowd's angry murmur rose like thunder until Mayor Hendricks called for order. That's when I finally stood up, walking calmly to the microphone as the room fell completely silent. Every eye was on me. Cameras zoomed in, recording what would become the defining moment of this entire nightmare. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady and clear, "I'd like to make an announcement." Cordelia was staring at me with pure hatred, her perfectly applied makeup streaked with tears of rage and desperation. "As of this morning, I've donated 30 acres of my ranch to establish the Uncle Rusty Memorial Nature Preserve. The creek frontage will become a public park, protected forever from development." The applause started slowly, then built to a thunderous ovation that shook the building's windows. Cordelia's face went through a spectrum of emotions: disbelief, rage, and finally, complete defeat. "Mrs. Blackthorne," I said directly into the microphone, my words carrying to every corner of the room and every viewer watching the live stream, "your decade of terrorizing families is over. Your criminal enterprise is finished. And your dream of destroying my family's land just became our community's greatest victory." Sheriff's deputies moved toward Cordelia as she completely lost control, screaming incoherently about conspiracies and her ruined plans. The cameras captured every moment of her final public meltdown. Justice, it turned out, tasted like sweet mountain air and sounded like 184 people cheering for the end of a tyrant's reign. 6 months later, I'm sitting on my porch watching my kids build a treehouse in the oak tree that Cordelia's crew somehow missed during their sabotage spree. The sound of their laughter mixing with the creek's gentle babble is everything Uncle Rusty would have wanted for this place. Cordelia's sentencing made national news. 3 years federal prison for environmental crimes, plus 2 additional years for embezzlement and fraud. The judge called her actions a systematic campaign of psychological terrorism against vulnerable families. Drake's divorce was finalized within weeks, and he moved to Montana to start fresh. The financial aftermath was even more satisfying. Our class action lawsuit resulted in a $1.8 million settlement distributed among affected residents. Javier used his portion to expand his construction business and landed the contract to renovate half the HOA's common areas under the new, democratically elected board. Martha opened her permanent restaurant location in downtown Millfield, specializing in Korean-Mexican fusion that's become legendary throughout the county. The Cordelia Special, extra spicy kimchi tacos, is her best-selling item, though she insists the name was my idea. The new HOA leadership eliminated 73% of Cordelia's arbitrary rules, transforming Willowbrook Estates from a suburban prison into an actual community. Property values increased 23% once word spread about the reformed governance and elimination of harassment campaigns. My 30-acre donation became the Uncle Rusty Memorial Nature Preserve, complete with hiking trails and educational signage about native wildlife. The county matched my contribution with a $150,000 development grant, and the state designated the entire creek system as protected habitat after discovering an endangered salmon species. The treehouse project became a community effort. Javier donated materials and expertise, Martha provided lunch for the volunteer crews, and Rosa documented the construction for a follow-up Tribune series on community healing after trauma. Watching neighbors who'd been terrorized into isolation work together again was better therapy than any counselor could provide. Tyler and Madison permanently moved in with me after seeing how much happier they were on the ranch. Their mother admitted the peaceful environment was better for their mental health than city apartments and custody battles. We converted Uncle Rusty's workshop into a homework space where neighborhood kids gather for tutoring and science projects. The Uncle Rusty Memorial Scholarship launched with $50,000 from my settlement money, providing trade school funding for students from families affected by bureaucratic harassment. The first recipient was Javier's nephew Miguel, studying electrical engineering with plans to return and help modernize our rural infrastructure. Rosa's Tribune series won a state journalism award and sparked HOA reform legislation in Oregon's next legislative session. 3 other counties launched investigations into similar corruption patterns, discovering that Cordelia's network extended far beyond our small community. The ripple effects keep spreading. National HOA accountability organizations use our case as a textbook example of fighting systematic abuse. A documentary film crew spent 2 weeks interviewing residents last month, planning a feature about grassroots resistance to corporate-style neighborhood control. The practical lessons from our fight became a resource guide that's helped hundreds of families facing similar harassment. Document everything with timestamps and backups. Know your actual property rights before someone in a power suit intimidates you. Build coalitions because isolated targets are vulnerable targets. Use the legal system strategically, not emotionally. Every evening, I walk the nature preserve trails that wind through land Cordelia wanted to pave over for luxury condos. The creek runs clear and cold, supporting wildlife that would have been destroyed by her development scheme. Eagle nesting boxes installed by volunteer scouts attract breeding pairs each spring. The biometric gate still stands at my entrance, though now it's programmed to recognize 5 community leaders who help maintain the preserve. It remains our symbol, open to friends, sealed against tyranny. Annual property rights festivals draw families from across the Pacific Northwest to celebrate successful resistance against bureaucratic abuse. This year's event featured workshops on dealing with HOA overreach, legal aid clinics, and a barbecue competition judged by former harassment victims who've become close friends. Where are they now? City Councilman Bradley pleaded guilty to corruption charges and moved to Florida in disgrace. His developer accomplices paid $500,000 in fines and are banned from Oregon projects. The postal inspector who helped investigate the mail fraud got promoted to regional director. As for me, I'm dating the environmental lawyer who helped establish the preserve's protected status. Life has a way of bringing the right people together when communities heal. Drop a comment sharing your HOA horror story. You're not alone in fighting these battles. Hit subscribe if you want more stories about ordinary people beating corrupt systems through courage and community organizing.
Thanks for hanging out with us on HOA Stories, where the HOA Karens meet their match. If this story had you cheering or cringing, go ahead and like the video, drop a comment with your reaction, and hit subscribe so you're ready for the next wild HOA tale.